Hi, this is Vinyl Monkey here, broadcasting my first ever YouTube video from a town called Hartlepool on the northeast coast of England. And for any of you who are not familiar with the legends around Hartlepool, I'll explain to you the link between the name Vinyl Monkey and the town of Hartlepool, maybe a bit further down the line. But welcome everybody. What this is about is a brief alphabetical tour through my vinyl collection, which I hope you might find interesting. And what I intend to do is to just pick out a handful of albums, going through the alphabet, starting today with A, of course, and to pick albums that I think you might find interesting, you might not have come across, you might have forgotten about, or you might not have listened to for quite a while. And I hope it might inspire you to look them up, give them a listen, and try them for yourself. So, bit of background. I've only just restarted building up this collection really over the last 3 years or so. I got my vinyl out of the loft, and it wasn't a big collection to start with, largely because way back in 1976, when Johnny Rotten & Co came into my life, I decided that 90% plus of my record collection, and I had a canny collection at that time, were by dinosaurs. I decided that all my albums by the likes of Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, even Black Sabbath and Co were dinosaurs. Punk was the only way forward. Anything more than 2 or 3 chords was superfluous. And over a couple of nights, a mate of mine and I, we had a great couple of nights having a good drink, and in a bit of a punk frenzy we smashed most of these albums over our knees and flung them about in his house, and so it was a great time. But obviously since then I've rebought a lot of those albums, both on CD and more latterly even on vinyl again, and paying a lot more obviously than I will have done back in the 70s for them. But there we are, hey ho. So without further ado, I think make a start looking at a few records from my collection that begin with the letter A, and I want to start with a jazz album. This is Nat Adderley, Work Song. Some of you might be familiar with Nat's older brother, Cannonball Adderley, the saxophonist, played with Miles Davis and led his own band. The younger brother Nat, to my ear at least, and I'm not a jazz aficionado, although I do enjoy jazz and I do have quite a few jazz records, but equally talented to his brother. He plays trumpet and cornet, and this is one of the albums where he plays some of his own compositions and leads a band. And he's particularly supported on here by the guitarist Wes Montgomery, absolutely fantastic jazz guitarist, and also by Bobby Timmons on piano, and a number of bass and cello players. And it's quite unusual makeup of a band really, particularly to see cello up front in a hard bop jazz band. But this is a great album. You'll be particularly familiar with the title track, Work Song, which I won't hum for you, although it's a very hummable track, but I don't want to get this video off to a bad start. So he died about 20 years ago or so, I think, Nat Adderley, born in the early 30s. And when I looked up his biography, it was interesting to see he's about the same age as my dad, who passed away last year. And what was more interesting was that Nat Adderley did his national service in the early 50s at the same time as my dad did his national service with the British Army, and they were in the same place in the Korean War in the early 50s. And it reminded me, my dad always used to tell a story of when they disembarked from the ship that had taken them across to Korea, in the docks in South Korea. They were heralded ashore by an American military band, and my dad always laughed that instead of playing military music, they were actually playing jazz music. And it would be really interesting to know not only if Nat Adderley was actually in that band on that day, but who else might have been in it. I mean, I guess a lot of his contemporaries who went on to become jazz greats also did the national service around about that time as well. So anyway, this is Work Song, Nat Adderley from 1961. The second album I'm going to hold up is by a band who were perhaps the biggest band to come from my part of the world, certainly in the 60s, and that's the Animals. And this is the Animals' first album, self-titled, and the Animals were Eric Burdon on vocals, Chas Chandler on bass, Alan Price on keyboards, Hilton Valentine, who just recently passed away, on lead guitar, and the drummer, whose name I can't remember. Sorry, Animals drummer, but perhaps those of you who are familiar with that might just add that in the comments column. But this is the Animals' first album. It's largely covers by the likes of Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, John Lee Hooker, but it's the first track on the album I'd particularly draw your attention to, and that's The Story of Bo Diddley, written by Eric Burdon himself. And this is an absolutely fantastic song in my opinion. It's basically it's a biography of Bo Diddley. It starts with his birth in Mississippi, I think, and the song goes through his life, and it's sort of a bit of a brief history of rock and roll as well, up until the birth of the British blues boom and the Beatles and the Stones, etc. in the early 60s. But the song story culminates in Bo Diddley visiting a nightclub in Newcastle where the Animals were playing, and it's just a really great song, very funny as well, and that's the Animals from 1964. The next album, changing genre altogether again, this is Guns Don't Argue by Dennis Al Capone, and Dennis Al Capone is, what I understand, and I'm no expert on this type of music, or any type of music for that matter, as you'll probably soon appreciate, but Dennis Al Capone is what's known as a toaster, which I understand it's sort of like a DJ in that they're playing records, but instead of just speaking between the records, they're actually speaking over or singing over, or in Dennis Al Capone's case, yelping and squealing over the records as well, and adding a sort of new dimension to the music. And what it does is it provides a real live sort of feel to it, and you really get that when you listen to this album. You feel you're in some sort of gig or club. And this was released by Trojan Records in 1971. Trojan, who introduced a lot of bands and artists, reggae artists, to Britain in the early 70s. A real good album, Guns Don't Argue, Dennis Al Capone. And then about probably as far from downtown Kingston, Jamaica as you could probably get, to Canterbury in Kent, and this is Kevin Ayres' Sweet Deceiver. Kevin was part of what was known as the Canterbury scene, or the Canterbury set, in the early mid-60s. A number of bands and artists from that particular area. And he went on to become a founding member of Soft Machine, one of the first prog jazz rock bands of that time, who were contemporaries of the likes of Pink Floyd. I think they toured together actually in the early mid-60s. And this is a lovely album, great musicianship, good songs. This is the inner sleeve, and it's Kevin Ayres. He's supported particularly by the guy who he co-produced and played on many of Kevin Ayres' solo albums, the magnificently named Ollie Haircut on this album. Unfortunately not his real name, I think his real name's Holswell or something like that, but a very talented guitarist and musician, and as I say, some beautiful songs and musicianship on this. Elton John also actually plays piano on 3 or 4 of the tracks on this album, but I think perhaps this doesn't get the airplay it deserves in this particular household, and that's probably because although Kevin Ayres has got a beautiful baritone singing voice, he does sing, in my opinion, in a rather posh English accent, and I don't know whether it's my working class chip on the shoulder or what, but I do sometimes struggle with posh English accents, and I need to get over that. It's not his fault. It's a beautiful album. It's Kevin Ayres from 1975, Sweet Deceiver. And then lastly, a really different album again. This is from 1982, and this is Big Science by Laurie Anderson. And this is a very sparse, electronic, perhaps even cold, perhaps even scary album in many ways, and it addresses some of the big questions, in my view, about the planet and human nature and our place on this planet. And I think if you listen to this now, 40 years or so after it was produced, I think you appreciate that the sort of questions this album is addressing are perhaps more relevant even now than they were back then. And this is an album which really does hang together well as a singular work of art, in my opinion. Perhaps the most familiar song is the one that went on to become a hit single, Oh Superman, which kicks off side 2 on this. But it is a great album. She was a very talented artist, not just across music but on other forms of art as well. Part of the sort of New York scene, and that's Big Science, Laurie Anderson, 1982. Okay, so that's a handful of examples from the letter A. I hope somebody ends up watching this video. I hope that I will improve as I work my way through the alphabet. I hope my record collection will expand as we work through the alphabet, because otherwise I'll only have 2 to show you by the time we get to the letter Z. But if anybody is watching, any comments or suggestions as to how I can improve that will be most welcome, of course. But thanks anyway, and cheers everybody. Bye.